You think this is a game? I can keep you in here forever.
You cannot keep me here without a charge.
Just you watch me.
In front of her. Your attitude is what's putting you in a cell tonight, she said. Nobody in the small crowd dared to speak. But exactly 5 minutes later, the phone in the sheriff's office would not stop ringing. The first call came from Army Command, the second came from the Pentagon, and the final call would leave the entire department frozen in silence because the woman who had just been placed in handcuffs was not an ordinary citizen. She was in the middle of a top-secret national security assignment, and nobody in that parking lot had any idea what they had just started. The afternoon sun hung low over the interstate, throwing long shadows across the cracked asphalt of a gas station on the edge of Red Creek County. Amina Holloway pulled her aging SUV up to the pump, stepped out, and stretched her shoulders after 6 straight hours of driving. She wore plain clothes, nothing that drew attention, and she moved the way people move when they are used to being underestimated. Sheriff Clayton Rusk was parked across the lot, running what he called a routine check, though nobody could remember the last time his routine checks had anything routine about them. He watched her for a long moment before he got out of his cruiser and walked over, thumbs hooked into his belt, chin lifted like a man auditioning for a part he already believed he had won. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, though there was nothing warm in the greeting. "License and registration." Amina reached slowly and deliberately into her jacket, handed both over without a word, and waited. Rusk studied the documents far longer than necessary, glancing up every few seconds to study her instead. "Old car, out-of-state plates. You always drive alone like this?" Amina kept her voice level. "I'm just passing through, Sheriff. Is there a problem with my paperwork?" The question landed wrong, or maybe it landed exactly the way he wanted it to. His jaw tightened. "You got a problem answering my questions?" he asked, stepping closer, close enough that the gas station clerk inside looked up from his register. Amina didn't step back. "I answered your question," she said calmly. "I'm asking what the legal basis is for this stop." It was a simple sentence, the kind any lawyer would call reasonable, the kind any citizen has the right to ask. But to Clayton Rusk, a man who had spent 26 years mistaking silence for respect, it sounded like defiance. "Attitude," he muttered, half to himself, half to the small crowd gathering near the pumps. "That's what this is. I know an attitude problem when I see one." A young mother filling her tank lowered her phone and started recording, though she said nothing. An old man leaning against his truck shook his head slowly but stayed quiet. Nobody in Red Creek argued with Sheriff Rusk, not where he could hear it. Rusk unclipped his handcuffs with theatrical slowness, as if giving her one last chance to break, to apologize, to shrink. Amina did none of those things. She simply looked at him, steady as still water, and something about that stillness unsettled him more than any argument could have. "Turn around," he said. "You're being detained for obstruction and failure to cooperate." The crowd tensed. The young mother's phone trembled slightly in her hand. As the cold metal closed around Amina's wrists, she said only 4 words, quiet enough that only Rusk heard them clearly. "You sure about this?" He laughed, short and sharp, and shoved her gently toward the cruiser. "I'm always sure. Get in the car." The parking lot fell into an uneasy hush as Amina was lowered into the back seat, her expression unreadable, her spine still straight, even folded into that narrow space. Rusk turned to the crowd with the satisfied air of a man who believed he'd restored order to his little kingdom. "Nothing to see here, folks, just doing my job." But his deputy, a younger officer named Danny Whitfield, who had been standing off to the side through the whole exchange, shifted uncomfortably. "Sheriff, we don't really have grounds here." She handed over everything. She didn't resist. Rusk didn't even look at him. "Around here, I'm the law. Now get her processed." Hukum. At the station, Amina's phone was confiscated and dropped into a plastic bag without so much as a receipt. Her wallet was emptied onto a metal table, its contents spread out and photographed as though she were a suspect in something far larger than a traffic stop. Her vehicle, still sitting at the gas station, was radioed in for a search, no warrant, no documented cause. Danny watched all of it with a growing knot in his stomach, but said nothing further. He'd learned long ago that questioning Rusk in front of other officers was a fast way to end up writing tickets on the county's most remote stretch of highway. Bystanders had not stopped filming. Within minutes, 3 separate videos were circulating, capturing Amina's calm posture, Rusk's raised voice, the handcuffs, the search of her belongings without explanation. None had audio clear enough to catch every word, but they captured enough. A woman who never raised her voice once. A sheriff who raised his more than once. Cuffed to a metal bench in the holding area, Amina looked up at the clock, watched the second hand sweep past 12, and said quietly to no one in particular, 5 minutes. Danny, passing with a stack of paperwork, paused. 5 minutes for what, ma'am? Amina only smiled faintly and looked back at the clock. You'll see. At the front desk, the office phone began ringing. A tired clerk named Rosa Martinez picked it up. This is the Red Creek County Sheriff's Office. Who's calling? A pause. Her frown deepened. I'm sorry, can you repeat that? She set the receiver down slowly, as if it had grown heavier in her hand, and looked toward the back office. Sheriff, there's someone on the line asking about the woman you just brought in. Rusk waved a dismissive hand. Take a message, I'm busy. Rosa hesitated, then hung up, glancing at Amina through the glass partition, unsettled in a way she couldn't quite explain. 2 minutes later, the phone rang again. This is Army Command, a clipped voice said. We need immediate confirmation on the status and whereabouts of a federal consultant currently traveling through your jurisdiction. Rosa's pen froze. Army Command? The voice repeated itself, slower, each word deliberate. We are aware that a woman matching the description of Amina Holloway was detained in your county within the last hour. We need to speak with your commanding officer immediately. Rosa nearly ran to the back office. Sheriff, you need to take this call now. Rusk picked up the line with little interest, boots propped on his desk. This is Sheriff Rusk. The voice asked one question, calm and precise. Is Amina Holloway currently in your custody? Rusk chuckled. She's in a holding cell for attitude and obstruction, if that's what you're asking. Why, is she somebody important? A long, heavy silence made even his grin falter. Then the voice said only one sentence before disconnecting. You need to release her immediately, and you need to do it right now. Rusk laughed it off to Rosa. Army Command calling about some woman with an attitude problem. Probably some prank. Get back to your desk. But the phone rang again, this time the Department of Defense. We are calling regarding an active federal matter involving one of your detainees. Rosa carried the phone into the back office with both hands as though it might shatter. Rusk took it, more out of morbid curiosity than concern. This is Sheriff Rusk, he said, with noticeably less swagger. We understand you have detained a woman named Amina Holloway, the voice said. We need you to confirm her current condition and location immediately, and understand that any harm that comes to her in your custody will be treated as a matter of the utmost seriousness. Rusk's jaw tightened. She's fine, sitting in a holding cell like anyone else who gives me lip. The voice, calm and without emotion, asked, Do you understand who you currently have in custody, Sheriff? Rusk glanced instinctively toward the glass partition, where Amina sat unmoving, unbothered, as though the chaos belonged to someone else's story entirely. She's a woman I pulled over for a busted taillight and a bad attitude, he said, the lie slipping out easily, the way lies always did when he'd told smaller versions of them for 26 years and never once been challenged. The voice paused long enough that Rusk thought the call had dropped. Sheriff, we have satellite confirmation and a verified transponder signal placing Miss Holloway's vehicle at that exact gas station at that exact time. We are not asking you what you think happened. We are telling you what we already know happened. And the gap between those two things is about to become very expensive for you, personally. Rusk said nothing. For the first time all day, he had absolutely nothing to say. She's a nobody who couldn't answer a simple question without smart-mouthing me, he finally said, voice rising with defensive irritation. She's a person of interest to a classified federal operation currently underway in your jurisdiction, the voice replied, each word landing like a stone dropped into still water. Sheriff, you have just made a very serious mistake, and I would strongly advise you to prepare yourself, because in a matter of minutes, people far above my pay grade are going to be walking through your front door. The line went dead. Rusk stood holding the receiver, the dial tone humming in his ear, a small cold seed of doubt planting itself behind his ribs. He looked out at Amina again. She hadn't moved, but somehow, in the stillness of her hands and the patience in her posture, Rusk suddenly felt like the one being watched. He turned to Rosa. "Get me her file, all of it." Dynamically, down the hallway, a young clerk named Priscilla Owens whispered to Danny that she'd never once heard the sheriff's voice drop that low. Something about the calm certainty on Amina's face made Priscilla feel she was witnessing the opening minutes of something far bigger than a routine booking. She texted her sister, "Something is happening here, and I don't think the sheriff is in control of it anymore." Rosa pulled up whatever the county database could offer, but there was almost nothing beyond a name, a date of birth, and a license number that returned no flags, no warrants, no prior record of any kind. Most people who got detained had something. Amina had nothing at all, as though she existed in the system only enough to be recognized, not enough to be understood. Rusk scanned the printout twice, as if a second read might reveal something the first had missed. There was nothing there, only a clean, quiet record belonging to a woman who had spent her adult life staying deliberately unremarkable on paper. "This doesn't tell me anything," he muttered. Rosa said quietly, "Maybe that's the point, Sheriff," immediately regretting it under his sharp look. But she didn't take it back, because somewhere in the back of her mind a thought had already taken root, the same thought slowly working through everyone in the building. Some people are dangerous because of what they've done, others are dangerous because of what they're careful never to show. Outside, in the gathering dusk, 3 black SUVs turned off the highway and rolled silently into the gravel lot behind the station. No sirens, no lights, just the low hum of engines and the crunch of tires, arriving with the quiet certainty of people who never needed to announce themselves to be taken seriously. Rusk watched through the window, his stomach tightening in a way he hadn't felt since his first year on the force. Rosa looked at the vehicles, then at him. "Sheriff, I think they're already here." Inside, Amina allowed herself a small private glance as the headlights swept the lot. She recognized the formation immediately, the spacing, the angling near the exits rather than the entrance, the discipline of people trained to secure a location before ever stepping inside it. Danny noticed the shift in her expression. "You know them," he said, half question, half statement. Amina weighed how much to say to the one officer who'd voiced any doubt at all. "I know the kind of people they are. That's usually enough." The doors of the SUVs opened almost in unison. The men and women who stepped out moved with the unhurried precision of people who'd done this many times before. No shouting, no drawn weapons, just a calm, deliberate confidence that felt more intimidating than any show of force. A tall woman in a dark blazer, a federal ID clipped to her jacket, led the group toward the doors. Behind her walked 2 men in similar attire, and behind them a third figure who paused at the threshold and looked directly through the glass at Amina, offering her the faintest respectful nod. Rusk met them at the counter, trying to summon back some authority. "Can I help you folks?" The woman held up her identification. "Special Agent Dana Witham, Federal Oversight Division. We're here regarding the detention of Amina Holloway. I need every camera recording from this station, every officer's body-worn footage, and every document related to this arrest, within the next 10 minutes. "Now hold on just a minute," Rusk said, trying to reclaim footing. "This is my county, my jurisdiction, and I don't answer to—" Witham cut him off, her voice calm but immovable. "Sheriff, this stopped being your county the moment you put handcuffs on a federal asset in the middle of an active operation. Who signed the arrest report?" Rusk straightened with the same misplaced pride he'd shown at the gas station hours earlier. "I did. I signed it." Witham looked at him for a long, silent moment. "We'll need to speak with you privately, right now." While Rusk was led into a side office, another agent approached the holding area. For the first time since the cuffs went on, something in Amina's posture eased, not fear leaving her, but a burden finally set down. "Ma'am, we're very sorry for the delay." She gave a small, tired smile. "It's not your fault. Just get me updated on the operation status. Is the asset still secure?" The agent nodded. "We managed to adjust in time, but it was close." Amina exhaled slowly. "Close is better than compromised." In the side office, Witham opened a folder in front of Rusk. "Sheriff, do you know who Amina Holloway is?" Rusk shook his head. his bravado replaced by tight, defensive silence. "She is a former Defense Intelligence officer with 2 decades of distinguished service," Witham said, sliding a page across the desk. "She currently serves as a special advisor to the Department of Defense on a classified witness protection program. Today she was relocating a protected witness through this exact route at this exact time because it had been cleared as low risk and unremarkable." A second page listed commendations spanning nearly 20 years, assignments in 3 countries, and a security clearance Rusk didn't fully understand. "She has briefed generals, she has briefed members of Congress, and this afternoon she was doing something more dangerous than any of that, driving quietly through your county, trying to look like nobody at all, because the entire plan depended on nobody noticing her. You noticed her, Sheriff, for exactly the wrong reasons, and then you made sure everyone else noticed her too." Witham's tone never rose. "Your arrest took her off the road for close to 3 hours. It forced an emergency change to the extraction plan. It put lives at risk, not hypothetically. A member of my team, Agent Marcus Reyes, was on the ground trying to coordinate the handoff. When Miss Holloway didn't arrive and didn't answer her phone because you had confiscated it, he had to assume the worst and move without her." Rusk's voice came out smaller than intended. "I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem, Sheriff," Witham said, closing the folder. "You didn't ask, you didn't check. You saw a woman driving alone in a car you decided looked wrong, and you built an entire case out of the fact that she asked you a reasonable question instead of simply obeying without thought. That's not law enforcement, that's a man addicted to being obeyed. And today it very nearly cost this country an operation 2 years in the making." Rusk tried one last time. "I have 30 years of experience reading people. I know when somebody's hiding something." Witham looked at him without anger, which somehow made her next words land harder. "You read a calm woman answering a legal question calmly, and you decided that calm itself was the crime. That's not 30 years of experience, Sheriff. That's 30 years of never once being told no by anyone with the power to make it stick. Well, today someone finally has that power, and I promise you, we intend to use it." Word of the black SUVs spread through the station. Nearly every officer found some excuse to be near the front desk, watching, trying to understand what had walked into their building. An older officer muttered that he'd seen federal agents pass through before, but never like this. A younger deputy felt something close to relief, the quiet, guilty relief of someone who had long suspected the department was rotten in places nobody wanted to look. Rosa was ordered to pull every piece of footage the station possessed. A team of federal analysts set up laptops in the break room, reviewing hours of recordings frame by frame, the gas station footage showing the entire stop from beginning to end, Danny's body camera capturing his own quiet objection that Rusk had brushed aside, and the bystander videos, already circulating online, telling the same story from 3 different angles. Witham reviewed clip after clip in near silence, no dramatic reaction, just the quiet, methodical work of documenting exactly how badly it had violated procedure. At one point she paused on a frame of Rusk leaning close to Amina's face, his expression twisted with irritation over nothing more than a calmly worded question. "This is the whole case right here," she said. "We don't even need anything else." By the time the analysts finished, the list of violations filled several pages. No articulable legal basis for the stop. A vehicle search conducted without consent or a warrant. Personal property seized without documented procedure. An arrest built entirely on the sheriff's subjective judgment that a woman had used the wrong tone while asserting a right she was legally entitled to assert. Witham compiled it into a single report and set it in front of the county's assistant district attorney, whose face grew paler by the paragraph. Rusk, watching from a chair near the front, had nowhere left to direct his frustration. His deputies avoided his eyes. Rusk opened his mouth to argue his case, but the words seemed to shrink and die before they reached his lips, because for the first time in 26 years, nobody in that building seemed remotely interested in what he had to say. The assistant DA, a soft-spoken man named Gregory Payton, finished reading just as the sun sank behind the hills. "In 15 years, he told Witham, I've never seen a file build itself this fast or this completely." She nodded, unsurprised. "That's what happens when a man believes for 26 years that nobody is ever going to check his work. He stopped being careful a long time ago. Then let's make sure he understands that somebody finally is, Peyton said. By early evening, Witham returned to the side office and asked Rusk to stand. Sheriff Clayton Rusk, effective immediately, you are being relieved of your duties pending a full federal and state review of this incident. I'll need your badge and your service weapon. Rusk stared at her. You can't do that. This is my department. I was elected. Witham didn't blink. Elected officials are not above federal law, Sheriff. Right now you are the subject of a federal investigation into unlawful detention, civil rights violations, and interference with a national security operation. Your badge, please. For a long moment Rusk didn't move. It was Danny who finally stepped forward, gently. Sheriff, it's over. Just give it to them. Something about hearing it from his own deputy broke through whatever denial Rusk had been clinging to. Slowly, with trembling hands, he unclipped his badge, set it on the desk, and unbuckled his holster. There was nothing left to say. Amina, now released and seated with a cup of water someone had finally thought to offer, watched the exchange without any visible satisfaction, no flicker of vindication. When Witham asked if she wanted anything done differently, Amina simply shook her head. I want it handled correctly. That's all. Not harshly, not for show. Correctly. Within days, the videos made their way into local and then national coverage, though Amina refused every interview request. Reporters gathered outside the county building, cameras aimed at officers who now moved with visibly more caution. Former employees, emboldened by the attention, began coming forward with their own stories. Arrests built on nothing more than tone of voice, searches conducted without cause, a culture that had let one man's ego operate unchecked for years. An internal affairs investigation opened alongside the federal review, and a pattern became impossible to ignore. One woman described being detained for nearly 2 hours after questioning why she'd been pulled over near her own driveway. A man described being threatened with charges simply for asking to see a supervisor. None of these stories had gained traction before, not because they lacked truth, but because nobody with enough power had ever been willing to look. Now, with federal eyes fixed on Red Creek County, looking away was no longer an option. A retired deputy gave a lengthy statement describing a culture where questioning the sheriff, even quietly, was treated as disloyalty worth punishing, recalling an arrest nearly identical to Amina's, a teenager detained for nothing more than nervousness in his voice. His statement, corroborated by dispatch logs, became a cornerstone of the growing case, proof this had never been a single bad afternoon, but the visible tip of something the department had spent years burying. The county attorney's office announced it would review every arrest Rusk had personally overseen in the past 5 years, over 400 cases. Some would need to be revisited entirely. Others would serve as evidence in the mounting civil rights case federal prosecutors were building. Rusk, stripped of his badge, retreated to his house on the edge of town, where reporters occasionally camped outside, hoping for a statement he never gave. His lawyer advised silence, and for once he listened. A civil rights attorney took on several of the reopened cases pro bono and later told a courtroom that the tragedy wasn't simply what happened to Amina that afternoon, but how ordinary it had become for the department long before she ever drove through town, a pattern so deeply worn into the culture that everyone around Rusk had learned to treat it as weather, something to be endured rather than changed. Amina declined every microphone, every camera, every reporter who called hoping for a quote. When one persistent journalist finally reached her by phone weeks later, she offered a single sentence before ending the call politely. Nobody is above the law, not the people who break it, and not the people whose job it is to enforce it. Then she thanked the reporter and hung up, returning to whatever quiet, unglamorous work still filled her days. A grand jury was eventually convened. While several older incidents fell outside the statute of limitations, prosecutors moved forward on 3 counts tied directly to that single afternoon: unlawful detention, illegal search, and interference with a federal operation. Rusk's attorney negotiated for months, arguing exhaustion, decades of otherwise clean service, a single encounter misjudged under ordinary pressure. But the footage told a different story every time it played back in front of a judge. The same calm woman, the same unearned hostility, the same certainty on Rusk's face that no one would ever make him answer for it. In the end, he accepted a plea agreement, barring him permanently from holding any law enforcement position in the state again. A quiet ending, far quieter than the noise he'd made getting there. Months passed, and Red Creek County slowly began to change. A new sheriff, Patricia Alvarez, who had spent 15 years working federal cases before returning home, took over and immediately implemented reforms. Every stop now required documented, articulable cause. Body cameras, previously optional and often mysteriously malfunctioning, became mandatory and continuously monitored, with random audits from an independent oversight board. New officers went through expanded training on de-escalation and constitutional rights, training that emphasized again and again that a citizen's calm insistence on their rights was never, under any circumstance, grounds for arrest. Danny stayed on, and under Alvarez's leadership finally became the kind of officer he'd always wanted to be, one who spoke up the first time, not only after the damage was done. Rosa kept a small note taped to her monitor. Ask twice before you assume. The department slowly filled with people willing to actually do the job right, while a few who couldn't adapt chose to retire quietly. Sheriff Alvarez, in her first public address, stood before a small crowd outside the station and spoke plainly, without notes. She told them the department had failed, not once but repeatedly, and that failure had been allowed to continue because too many people, herself once included, had decided it was easier to look away than to demand something better. She promised no miracles, only steady, visible change, measured not in speeches but in the number of complaints that would now actually be investigated, the number of stops that would now actually require a reason. It wasn't a perfect speech, it wasn't meant to be, but it was honest, and in Red Creek County, honesty from behind that podium had been in short supply for a very long time. Late one afternoon, nearly 8 months after that first arrest, Amina found herself driving through Red Creek County again, this time on nothing more urgent than a visit to an old colleague who had relocated nearby. She hadn't planned to stop, but as she passed the familiar gas station, something made her ease off the accelerator and pull in, tires crunching over the same gravel they had crossed months before under very different circumstances. Wallace Doyle recognized her almost instantly. He came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. "Ma'am, I remember you from back then. I'm real sorry about what happened here that day. I should have said something. I should have stepped in." Amina looked at him, with no anger, only tired, honest patience. "It's not your job to police the police, but thank you for saying that now." "You're not angry," he said, more a question than a statement. She considered it seriously. If a system is capable of correcting itself, then trust isn't gone. It's just been tested. That's different from being broken. Wallace lingered by the pump. "Can I ask you something? Weren't you ever scared, sitting in that cell, not knowing how it was going to end?" Amina considered the question honestly. "I was worried about the mission, about the person depending on me showing up. I wasn't worried about myself, because I already knew the truth was on my side, and the truth doesn't need me to be afraid to still be true." Wallace nodded slowly, telling her he'd remember that for a long time. She smiled, said goodbye, paid for her gas, and returned to her car without any further ceremony, no lingering resentment, no need to relive what had happened in front of a man who'd already carried enough guilt over simply watching from behind a counter. As she pulled back onto the highway, the gas station shrinking in her rearview mirror, the late afternoon sun caught the windshield and turned the whole world briefly gold. Somewhere behind her, Red Creek County continued its quiet, steady process of rebuilding, a department learning, sometimes painfully, that authority without accountability was never really authority at all, only the illusion of it, propped up for years by silence and by the assumption that nobody with enough power would ever bother to ask questions. And somewhere ahead of her, new assignments waited, new roads, new quiet corners of the country where Amina Holloway would continue doing the kind of work that rarely made headlines and never needed to, because she had never once measured her worth by whether anyone else recognized it. Agent Marcus Reyes, who had been forced to complete that first extraction without her, later told colleagues he thought of Amina often, not for the danger of that particular night, but for the way she'd handled its aftermath without bitterness, without theater, simply insisting that the process be allowed to work the way it was designed to. He said it taught him something about patience no training manual ever could. The difference between winning an argument and simply outlasting the noise long enough for the truth to catch up. Agent Witham kept a printed copy of the original case file in her office long after it closed, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how quickly ordinary power, left unchecked, could curdle into something far uglier than anyone watching from the outside might expect. Power can silence a person for a few minutes, an hour, even an entire afternoon spent behind bars for nothing more than the crime of asking a reasonable question. But it cannot silence the truth forever, not in an age where cameras capture what badges try to bury, not in a system that, however imperfect, still occasionally proves capable of looking honestly at itself and choosing, even belatedly, to make it right. Clayton Rusk had believed for 26 years that his authority made him untouchable. It took exactly 5 minutes, one phone call, and one calm, unshaken woman to prove him wrong. And it would take considerably longer than that for him to understand just how wrong he had truly been.